I want to take a moment this morning before beginning the talk to express a feeling that I suspect many of you share with me, and that is a deep and profound sense of gratitude for Victor and his deep and profound presence in this community and all that he does. So, Victor, thank you for who you are and who you are becoming. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time and place you find yourself in as you come to this message. There is a popular Zen story, sometimes referred to as the teacup story. And it goes a little something like this. There was an abbess of a Zen monastery who was renowned for her deep teachings. In fact, rumors were circulating that she might even be a bodhisattva. Her understanding and her ability to share it with others was that deep. And as word slowly spread throughout the region, it reached a very wealthy and powerful dowager who considered herself a woman of great learning and culture. She was a fine poet, had acquired and built a fine scholarly library, and was a patron of many scholars and learners throughout the land. And she heard about this abbess and decided she needed to go see what she could learn. So she arrives at the monastery and asks for an audience with the abbess, who, of course, welcomes her kindly. And the abbess says, what can you tell me about awakening? And the abbess says, of course, let's have this conversation, but first, tea. She puts out the cups, takes the teapot, and begins to serve some tea to the dowager. And the teacup fills and continues to fill and begins to overflow onto the table. And the dowager says, stop, the teacup is full. Why are you still pouring? The abbess places the pot down and says, your mind is like this teacup. It is already so full that there is no room for anything else. And there, of course, are many variations of this story. That's my own personal variation of it. And there, of course, are many variations and interpretations. But from what I can tell, the most common interpretation is that this is a kind of a hype story, if you will, or an urging to celebrate beginner's mind. And Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki Roshi quotes and encourages this. He says, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the experts, there are few. So this is what the abbess was trying to communicate to the dowager, right? You need to make some room for some new possibilities and let go of some of those preconceptions. And that sounds really great. Wouldn't we all love to do that? The truth is, it's hard to let go of that warm, comforting, full cup and to empty it out in order to let in new possibilities. That's what I want to talk about today, is how can we do that, right? And why would we do that? Why would we want to empty the cup? And I would suggest that we want to learn how to do that, not so that the cup remains empty, but so that it can be filled and that we can continually be nourished in new ways over and over. I also want to talk about this term beginner's mind, because there's another term called don't know mind, and they're often used interchangeably. I like to use them separately. I like to use them to describe really two flavors of the same experience. Two two experiences that seem very separate and very different, but in fact are just different responses to the same situation. And so I'll talk about what I might call the signs and symptoms of these two states. So we have beginner's mind, which we've already talked about, and some of the signs and symptoms that go with that. Well, first, there's sort of an emotional state, right? This idea of freshness, curiosity, desire to investigate, openness. And then there is the body sense, the felt sense in the body of curiosity, which is often a more open posture. We talk about leaning into something, a sense of energy and calm, stability. And then there are the thought patterns that tend to go with beginner's mind. And so thinking about that teacup, if it's empty, the beginner's mind might say, oh, what could possibly fill this? What would it taste like? What would it feel like to have a full cup? So curiosity. Now, don't know mind, a little different variation. The emotional states that tend to come in response to this empty cup, or what we might call not knowing, and don't know mind can be more anxious, worrying, a need to problem solve, rumination. The body sense is often of a different kind of energy, a sort of busy buzziness. Sometimes we hear the phrase being driven to distraction. And it's like we have this need, this discomforting energy that's buzzing throughout the body, and it drives us to want to do anything we can to not feel it, to distract ourselves from it. And then the thought cycle that might go with this don't know mind, looking at that empty cup, that situation of not having all the answers, might be like, oh, where am I ever going to get anything to fill this cup? What am I going to do if this cup never gets full? How will I make it if I don't have something to drink? And this is often called catastrophizing. So it's very easy to hear these descriptions and think, well, obviously don't know is bad and beginner's mind is good. Why don't we just try and get out of don't know mind and stay in beginner's mind all the time, right? Easy. But I would suggest that it's really context dependent, and there are both good and bad, pros and cons, let's say, benefits and disadvantages to both, and a lot of it depends on the context. So if we look at don't know, because it does tend to feel so uncomfortable when we get into that more anxious state, we can think that it's strictly bad. But there is a benefit, and some scientists and psychologists theorize that maybe this benefit is why we feel this state, why it actually exists in our human experience. And the fact is that that discomfort actually drives us to take objective action, to problem solve. And a lot of times there's a benefit to that, right? If we're being chased by a tiger, we probably want to find a good route and a good escape route. We want to solve that problem. The problem is when we get stuck there, or, Buddhism talks about the middle path. And so the problem is when we get stuck at the extreme. Dan Harris talks about a conversation with Joseph Goldstein about worrying. And, we need to worry, we need to problem solve. And Joseph Goldstein says, yes, but maybe the 20th or the 30th time you've gone over the situation in your head, you can ask yourself, is this helping? Is this productive worrying? Is it helping me solve the problem? So, don't know, has some potential benefit, moves us to action. Beginner's mind. Looks like it would be all great, fresh, curious, open to possibilities. But what if we just lived there indefinitely and never called upon all this valuable experience and expertise? We lived our lives with that fresh mind of a toddler. Would we get much done? I worry that we might not. And so, again, it's about extremes. If we totally abandon all that valuable expertise and knowledge, we run the risk of, yes, being very open to possibilities, but also perhaps being overwhelmed and not accessing that expertise that allows us to navigate all those possibilities as beneficially as possible. So how can we find that balance, that middle way? Well, I want to offer some potential practices. Now, of course, I'll give a general overview. These practices have depth and more detailed instructions that go with them, but the invitation is for you to perhaps see how the idea of them lands with you, and then if you choose to continue to investigate them and bring some beginner's mind to them on your own. And the first practice is that we might intentionally cultivate beginner's mind. And you might be thinking, well, I just said we don't want to hang out in beginner's mind all the time, but you've heard me perhaps talk about something called negativity bias, which is that as humans, negative things tend to stand out more to us. We pay more attention to them automatically. Again, this is a survival mechanism. It's really important to pay a lot of attention to the tiger approaching that might put us in danger. So we have a tendency to hang out in don't know mind, in anxiety land, a lot more than beginner's mind. So often the way to balance these two out is to actively cultivate beginner's mind. So there's a couple ways we can do this. One is the traditional koan practice, which is from the Zen tradition, and you maybe have heard a koan like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? And it's designed to put you into a state of trying to solve a problem that has no solution. And so you have to just let go of intellectualizing and ruminating about it in order to just experience that state of don't know. But there's another way that calls upon a very different tradition. And sometimes this way is called deity yoga, and is present in a lot of primarily Tibetan traditions, but very, very strongly in what's called the Vajrayana tradition. And in this way, we can actually look at those signs that I pointed to, what our mental imagery is, our mental dialogue, and our felt body sense is. And we can actively evoke what it's like to be in beginner's mind. So we can bring pictures to mind that embody or that represent being curious and open and fresh. We can say a mantra or a phrase like, may I be curious, may I be receptive, and cultivate that sort of mental talk. And then we can evoke in our body what it's like through posture and emotion to feel receptive and curious and wanting to investigate and explore. And by practicing that intentionally, we can hopefully start to train curiosity instead of catastrophe to be a more automatic response to not knowing and not having answers. The other practice I would like to offer is vipassana, or in Sanskrit, vipassana. Both pronunciations work. And this is often called insight or seeing clearly. The translation I am most fond of is super seeing, because it makes me feel like I'm cultivating a superpower when I'm doing it. And this is just exactly what it says. And I like to think of it as sort of learning to spot uncertainty and our response to it in the wild, recognizing it as it's actually happening. And so we can learn to track that response, that state of don't know or beginner's mind, whatever it is, that state of not having answers. We can learn to actually observe it as an object of meditation. And there's a very simple way to do that. And first of all, we might need to bring it up in the mind. So we can think of a situation where we don't have the answers. One that's coming up for me a lot these days is uncertainty about masking. When do I mask? Where do I mask? What is the safety? How do I know what's safe? And so I can call that up and notice what that feels like, sounds like, and what I see in my mind and body. And then I can start to track the intensity of that. And I like to do this through numbers, but you could just use a phrase. And so I might just notice over time, check in and say, right now, if a 5 was a panic attack and 0 was all is well with the world, maybe right now I'm at a 3. 3, 2, 4. And I can just track, kind of sampling like a scientist every few seconds to see what's the state of uncertainty in my experience. What's my felt sense of uncertainty? And I actually learned this probably about 8 years ago. The first time the teacher gave the instructions and I started practicing this, and within just a few minutes, I felt this shift, this sort of weight lift from my body, and I started laughing uncontrollably. Sitting there by myself on my meditation cushion, I was listening to the instructions on a phone call. It was a phone retreat. And the reason I had this really felt sense of change was because by tracking what was happening, this state of anxious uncertainty that I had thought was so solid and permanent and so gripping, all of a sudden became just what it actually was. Just a constellation of sensory experience, a combination of body feelings, of mental dialogue, and mental images. That's all it was. And it was actually changing a lot in a really arbitrary way, which is what made me laugh. Why was I so worried and driven by this thing that was just like a wave on the ocean, always changing? And so, don't know is always going to be there. Right? That's never going away. And there's no such thing as absolute certainty. If you need a reminder of that, just look back to the past year and a half or so. And if you can't beat it, why not join it? Why not embrace uncertainty? Embrace the don't know. Embracing don't know has the power to transform it. It can transform anxiety into curiosity, doubt into inquiry, and ultimately, through practice, through this continual befriending, it has the power to transform deep suffering into profound freedom and awakening.